After watching the regular trailer of Avatar Fire and Ash a couple of times, I compared it to the IMAX version, and there's actually quite a lot more to unpack. Avatar Theory here, hope you're doing well and having a fantastic day. And in case you've not yet seen the trailer to Avatar Fire and Ash, I would recommend that you go watch it right now before you come back to this video, because I want you to experience it on your own for the first time without anybody talking over it, without any interruptions. You need to experience it in full, and once you've seen it, you can come back to this breakdown to see what you might have missed. In fact, I've already done a breakdown on some of the stuff that I found on my initial watching of the trailer. There is a lot more that I discover as I keep rewatching the trailer, but now that I got my hands on the IMAX trailer, the aspect ratio is so much bigger and it shows us a lot more stuff that was not initially shown in the trailer. So let's start right at the end of the trailer, where Varang holds Kiri captive and she says, "Your goddess has no dominion here." So you can see Kiri is all bruised up, full of dirt, so she obviously went through a lot already, and I think the person holding her here is not Varang, because I actually think Varang is holding somebody else, and that is Spider, because if you continue with the scene, you can see that in her left hand she's holding hair, and as she pulls it closer, a head pops out ever so briefly, and that is clearly Spider. I mean, who else would it be? This was just one of the things that was not shown in the regular aspect ratio, and it changes the scene a little bit on what we know. And also, if you look at the background of Varang, this clearly takes place at night and in the forest. I know in the trailer they kind of cut it together where Neytiri lands and pulls her bow, so you kind of think that these two scenes are connected, but it's clearly not, because Neytiri lands in that area where there's fire and destruction, and here it just looks like it's taking place at night and in the forest. So I do think that Varang takes Kiri and Spider captive here, and like I said, you can clearly see there she's holding Spider's hair. The next bit of detail is where Neytiri tells Jake, or I'm guessing that it is Jake, where she says, "We will find another way." And here you can clearly see that she was wearing the paint of the Mongquan warriors. You can see that she has a little bit of red paint on her arms, she has white paint on her shoulders, and the red coming down on her chest, which gives me the impression that this was Neytiri from the first shot we saw of Avatar Fire and Ash all that time ago, the behind the scenes image, who I initially thought was Kiri, but comparing that to how Neytiri looks here, I do think that it might have been her. And she was crying maybe because they failed in rescuing the children, and thus Neytiri says, "We will find another way." But it's just interesting how much more we see from the scene with Neytiri wearing the paint of the Mongquan warriors. Now, speaking of Neytiri, I've said before that she gets shot in the shoulder with an arrow, and the detail in the IMAX trailer is just so much more, and you can clearly see now that it is Neytiri lying on the Ikran with an arrow sticking out of her. It is a beautiful shot, especially in IMAX ratio, but you can clearly see that it is Neytiri lying on top of the Ikran. And going on the shot where she says, "the children," you can actually now see the wound where she was shot, not specifically in her shoulder, but in her chest, because you can see there's some blood coming through the bandage, and you can see she has some scars on her shoulder, and she also has some sort of arm sling, which, if you go onto this scene where Jake tells her that she cannot live in hate, you can clearly see that she definitely has an arm sling, which upon initial viewing of the trailer, it looked more like she was just wearing a different outfit. I was unsure at the time if she was wearing an arm sling, but now you can clearly see that she was in fact wearing an arm sling, and the little patch sticking out behind the chest wrapping clearly matches where her wound was, which again just goes to show you how much more detail is shown in the IMAX trailer. Now, some of the shots that I do want to highlight in the IMAX format, especially the amount of detail, is specifically the opening shot of the trailer of the floating mountains, just how beautiful it looks, how much detail is shown, and also when Loak and presumably Netem flies on the Ikran, you can zoom in much more now and you can see that this is most certainly Netem, based on the character's physique the hair, the positioning, and just everything. I'm almost like 90% sure this is Totem. Now, when we look at the floating structures from the Windtraders, specifically where they arrive at the Metkayina forest, you can see the stone arches, likely as they're heading to the Tree of Souls. And although it does show in the original trailer, here you can just see much more at the bottom and at the top. And I do think that this is where the aerial battle will take place, where the Mangquan clan will attack the Windtraders, and likely where Neytiri will get injured. Now, one of my favorite IMAX shots doesn't really provide any specific new detail. It is just a gorgeous shot, and it is this one here of Qauritch walking up the mountain with a volcano in the background. This is something I wouldn't mind having framed, as it just looks breathtaking. Not really any specific detail, just thought I'd bring it to your attention, and why watching this movie in IMAX would be the way to watch this movie for sure. Now, we do get a massive wide shot of the Mangquan village, the Ash village, and again you can just see so much more in detail the destruction of their home, or what's remaining from their burnt down home tree. You can even see there's some red spots on some of the wood, kind of replicating their red paint almost, and all over the place you can just see everything's burnt down. And I kind of feel bad for them considering what they've gone through, but if you zoom in much more to the shot, you can actually see there is somebody with a backpack, which is of course Qauritch. And interestingly, something I noticed with the IMAX trailer is that you can see that totem that we saw in the concept art, although it is a little bit blurry because it is far away, but it is there nonetheless. So I do wonder if we will see this scene from the concept art where everybody's wearing kind of different masks and looking all like Silent Hill-esque. I kind of get that Silent Hill vibe from this. I do wonder how this will look on screen and how terrifying it'll be to see Navi dressed like this. Now, something I noticed about the Tulkun scene where you see Tonawari and Renal is that at the bottom there you can actually see Lawak sitting attending this ritual. It wasn't shown in the regular aspect ratio, so I do wonder if the scene where Lawak and Jake fights take place shortly after this ceremony. Another bit of detail that I discovered is that this scene where you see Spider and Kiri, actually right behind Kiri is Tuk. I didn't notice that upon my initial watch of the trailer, but seeing it now in IMAX, maybe because of the enhanced quality, but regardless, it does seem like in this scene it is just Spider, Kiri and Tuk. And then likely in the scene where Lawak is looking through the rifle, he is trying to rescue them, finds them, and then gets attacked by the Mangquan. Because we know the scene where Lawak is shooting with the rifle, that takes place during nighttime and in the forest. And we know the scene where Kiri is held captive and where Varang holds Spider by the hair also takes place during nighttime. So I do think all of these scenes are connected. Now, speaking of fire and Varang, the scene where she lights her fingers on fire, in the initial trailer, you don't see that much of her face, but here you can clearly see that it is Varang and she is playing with fire, testing out this liquid, seeing what she can do. So this, of course, likely takes place before they shoot or they attack the children with fire arrows. This is probably her experimenting with this liquid. Maybe they discovered it by themselves, or maybe thanks to the RDA, but regardless, it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But the last thing I want to point out for now about the IMAX trailer is the part where Spider jumps on the floating rocks with those floating structures in the background. Now you can clearly see right below him is Jake and Qauritch fighting. So obviously Spider is trying to save Jake. I'm guessing he sees Jake is in trouble, so he grabs that weapon and then jumps down the rocks to try and save Jake with all of this stuff happening in the background. And as Spider is jumping down, you can see the rocks above him is kind of disintegrating while it's floating upwards. Again, I have no idea what's happening here. You can clearly see the structure is metal, and it does look, based on the background, that maybe there's water involved as well. But honestly, I have no idea what's happening here. Your guess is as good as mine. But overall, there's quite a bit of new information discovered from watching the IMAX trailer compared to the regular one. Again, from multiple viewings, I'm probably going to discover more and more things. And as marketing for this movie is starting to roll out, more information is going to be revealed. Thus, certain scenes are going to make a bit more sense, and when coming back to them, I will probably discover new things which I will keep you guys updated with. But what do you think about the IMAX version of this trailer, and have you seen the IMAX trailer of Avatar Fire and Ash? Was there anything specific I missed from the IMAX trailer? Let me know in the comments below, and for more Avatar content, have a look at the rest of my channel. Until next time, have a fantastic day and stay safe.